Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 10th Annual Crook's Corner Book Prize discussion with Ben Fountain and Caroline Frost. I'm Maggie from Flyleaf Books, and I will be running the tech side of things tonight. I just want to say, if you've got any issues with your screen going dark or any other kinds of Wi-Fi issues, try refreshing your browser or just logging back into Crowdcast. That can sometimes take care of some things. Feel free to put any questions you might have for the authors in the chat or in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you'd like to buy a copy of Caroline's book from Flyleaf, you can buy a copy at the tab that says buy your copy now underneath our faces on the screen. So without further ado, I'm going to get rid of myself and let Anna Hayes and Taylor Boogie at the library take over the evening's events.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anna. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's just great. I'm thrilled to be here, and we've got such a great lineup here. It's so exciting. Most of you, if not all of you, know that the Crook's Corner Book Prize was modeled after, inspired by the just wonderful and prestigious literary awards that are given by famous literary cafes in Paris. Here in Chapel Hill, we partnered with the iconic Southern restaurant Crook's Corner and created the book prize. During COVID, unhappily, Crook's had to close. But the book prize continues. And in fact, you heard it here, we're hopeful that the restaurant will reopen. So stay tuned for that. We're hopeful. So tonight, it is my tremendous pleasure to announce this year's winner of the Crook's Corner Book Prize for Best Debut Novel set in the American South, chosen by our judge, Ben Fountain. And you're looking at our winner on your screen. It is Caroline Frost for Shadows of Pecan Hollow. And we are just tickled to death. And congratulations, Caroline.
Thank you.
Could not be more pleased. And so now, tonight, we're going to all have the pleasure of listening to a conversation between Caroline and Ben. And I'm going to hand the program back over to Taylor at the library, and she's going to moderate the discussion. And just again, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anna, and thank you to Flyleaf for helping us host this program. And thank you to Ben and Caroline for being here. I'm really excited to have this discussion with both of you. Caroline, congratulations. This is your book is lovely, and it's such a well-deserved award. To get things started, Ben, as the judge for this year's prize, can you tell us what it was about this book in particular that stuck out to you above all of the other submissions?
This book doesn't make any compromises. I mean, Caroline goes straight to the heart of some very dark human matters. And I think, so much of her book swings between the poles of fear and desire. I mean, the most desperate kind of desire and the most abject kind of fear, physical fear, but also emotional fear, fear of losing someone, of being alone, fear of just the unknown. And in a lot of ways, it's a terrifying book, and emotionally terrifying. And we'll get into that, but it's a really satisfying book to read. It just doesn't flinch from some of the very hardest things in human experience. And that's what I look for in books. I mean, books that have real guts and heart and soul and that are fearless. I mean, there's so much out there that's written for easy consumption, and it's tamped down and it's competent work, but it shies away from the very hardest things. And Shadows of Pecan Hollow it goes straight for the gut.
Yeah, great. Caroline, on that note, do you want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you, Ben, for those words. That's so wonderful to hear. And you're right, I did not hold back. It was about a decade of kind of like, or more, I guess my whole life, of cumulative kind of writerly energy, like gathering and funneled into one book. So, but Shadows of Pecan Hollow, I say pecan, but if we want to get to that point, I have a great reverence for regional pronunciations and specificity. So I encourage everyone to just say it however they say the word pecan. For me, it's pecan. Apparently, there's 5 or 6 discrete ways of saying it, but that one's mine. But Shadows of Pecan Hollow is the story of Kit Walker, who, as a early teenager was, or 12-year-old was picked up by a con man and groomed to be his partner in crime and then his lover. And 13 years after a job gone wrong, he gets out of prison and comes to the little town she's been hiding in to settle some debts. And so it's a story told between the 1970s and the 1990s, and explores her kind of reckoning with her past, with her feelings for this person, and with her relationship with her daughter, which gets wrapped up in all this, her teenage daughter. So yeah, there's a lot in there.
I think Ben really hits on something about some of the dark themes that it explores around grooming and control and being a child in the foster system. And yet I thought, in spite of all of that, it has a lot of hope. And so was it a challenge to write about a character going through all of those things and maintain that sense of hope throughout the story, that she would come through it all in the end?
Yes, it was a challenge. It sure was. And it was also really important to me. So part of my story is I was a psychotherapist for 10 years. And, the great lesson that I learned doing that work is that people go through the hardest things. And it's your next door neighbor, it's you, it's someone in your family. People have lived really, really tough stuff, and you wouldn't know it. And that what I got to witness, what I had the privilege of witnessing as a therapist, was hearing about these things, being trusted to hold these experiences, and watching people claw their way out of it. And that so I have a great deal of hope for the human spirit and for human resilience. And so it was important for me to, like you said, Ben, not to flinch from these experiences, and to characterize them, to do justice to these different situations that she's been in. And also for her recovery to feel earned. And so it couldn't come too easily. And I know some of the criticism I've gotten is that maybe I could have been a little bit easier on her, or cut her a little bit of slack. But it was important to me, someone who's been through something like this is not going to just turn around and learn her lesson. She's got to hit her head against the brick wall 101 times. So yes, it does come from, I would say, a deep knowing, a deep trust in the resilience of the human spirit. And I have all the hope in the world, and always try to hold hope for the people that I'm working with, or was working with.
Yeah, it's I found it really interesting in that vein of putting this character through all of these terrible things that that some people found her to be unlikable, but I interpreted that as very intentional, as a result of her experience. That it's a really compelling way to look at how even after getting out of something traumatic like a toxic relationship, that still impacts your future experience with other relationships with other people, and I thought it was an interesting way to explore the idea of an unlikable protagonist, especially with women in fiction who I think get have that label applied to them. So those sort of essential experiences to Kit that readers interpret as likability, which is a assumption about a lot of female characters that I think are not always fair.
Thank you for picking up on that. I couldn't agree with you more. I actually was on a panel at the Texas Book Fest entitled Unlikable Characters, What's Not to Like. And and I had such a great conversation with Amanda Bestersiegel, another great author, about this very issue. And it was quite intentional that she be unlikable. I didn't think of her as unlikable. I thought of her as incredibly wounded, incredibly guarded, fearful, and protective. And she'd been treated as, garbage, her whole life as less than. And so that's kind of that's what she put out into the world. And yes, I bristle at the term unlikable and have gotten it quite a lot. So,
well, to me, it's much more important that she be real.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, likable, unlikable. I like her because she's real. She rings true to me. She's authentic, given what she's been through, and from the most tender age, she strikes me as entirely authentic in the way she deals with the world, and all the world throws at her. So it didn't cross my mind once, oh, do I like this person?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I was so into the power of the character and just how genuinely she came across. And I mean, she's a very tough customer. She wouldn't be alive if she wasn't a tough customer.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think there's too much emphasis put on likability. It's like, I think the standard should be, is this character real? I mean, if you want likability, you can hang around with Sugar Faye. He's a character of Sugar Faye, and Sugar Faye will drive you up the wall in about 20 minutes. Whereas I'd much rather hang out with Kit. I mean, she's real. She's been through stuff, and she's got some very hard-won, I don't know if I'd call it wisdom, but just attitude.
I love how you talk about her like she's a real character. I feel that way about her too. She's alive in my mind.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, if I can. Marilyn Robinson has written about, she's written a lot about writing, and she says, there are plenty of writers who they know their characters well enough that they know what the character is going to do and say and how the character is going to feel. But it's something entirely different. And it takes us into different territory, deeper territory, when a writer is living inside the nerves, with all the contingency and unknowing and immediacy that we do live with in our daily lives, especially in moments of extreme moments. And so that's what I found over and over and over in this book, is that the writer was delivering us this nerve sensation of being in this woman's skin, and it's excruciating at times. It's also wonderful. So this is one of those nerve books. You know, obviously the author, she knows her characters through and through, but this book takes us to a different level. And Caroline was writing from the nerve ending.
Yeah, and speaking of characters who feel real, I found Manny a really compelling character as an antagonist, as this person who, he abducts and ends up grooming Kit, and sometimes maybe characters who are abusive can come across as sort of evil caricatures, but he has this really delicate balance, I think, of starting out as someone who's charming, and then very gradually shows himself to be menacing. And so at the beginning, I got a sense of him as someone who wanted to be reformed, but then quickly shows himself to be the same figure from her youth.
Yeah, Manny was a tough character to write, and I still don't feel like there's part of him that's still a mystery to me, and maybe that's, I don't know, purposeful or unconsciously purposeful. But yeah, so I don't know if you guys know this, but the story began as a screenplay. It was a movie in my mind before it was a novel, and I'd never written fiction before that. And so about 10 years ago, I wrote it really quickly, like a 2-week, just furious 90-page screenplay. And I'd been watching a lot of 90s thrillers at the time. So Sleeping with the Enemy, Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Silence of the Lambs, some Coen Brothers movies. And so he started out as a very two-dimensional, just, seed of evil kind of bad dude. And as I was writing, once I decided to write it as a novel and really live with these characters and expand on them, it was tricky to make him three-dimensional. And what I found, like, what I was able to sink my teeth into was that he was this beautiful creature who felt inside, at behind many layers of protection, wretched at his core, ugly at his core, unlovable at his core. And so he had developed all these different ways of protecting himself from that reality that his mother didn't, she put him on a pedestal, but she didn't want him. And there was something objectionable about him. And so the protections that he learns are to be charming and to kind of manipulate the people in his life and his surroundings in a way that's favorable to him. But at his core, he's far more fragile and self-loathing than Kit could ever be.
Yeah, what really struck me about him, I mean, you do the dangerous, menacing, manipulative side of him extremely well. But every once in a while, I mean, in certain moments, he'll say to Kit, "You and me were alike. We got nobody else in this world." And also in his interiority, when you go into, his from his point of view, I mean, he is hurting. I mean, this is a very damaged and pain-ridden person. And in his best moments, he looks to Kit to heal something in him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are fairly fleeting, but it's there and it's really powerful. So, I mean, we were talking about hope, optimism, resilience, but that's not the way it works for some people. And that's for right. The Mannies of the world, I mean, you guys remember the musical Oklahoma?
Mhm.
That just popped into my head. And so the Rod Steiger character, who's the bad guy,
Uh-huh.
and Judd, poor Judd is dead. And he's the bad guy. He serves a role in that movie, that musical. But I always felt pretty bad for him because he was lonely and he was hurting and he wanted love and he was an outcast. And so at the end of Oklahoma, everybody else is happy. With Judd's dead. And so I mean, it's not all happy endings.
Right. Well, I think in order to have growth and to have hope, you've got to want to change. And Manny didn't want to change, so he doesn't get that. He doesn't get the happy ending.
Well, and I think one of the things that was so fascinating to me was the way throughout the story that he would tell Kit, that it's just you and me, as a way of keeping her close. And it sort of sows this feeling of isolation and of not having anyone else that she can rely on. And so in the end, when she finally begrudgingly starts to realize that she has this community that is there, that would be willing to support her if she were to ask for it, I think that shift in her outlook is really gratifying as a way for her to grow out of the life that she had been living with Manny.
Thank you.
Let me ask, if I can, Caroline, do you think Kit can be happy going forward?
Yes, I do. I think her happiness comes from work. It comes from being able to choose how close she can be to people. And that's why I gave her Caleb, because Caleb gives her the space she needs. And he's there when she needs him, and he'll lay off when she doesn't. I think she's someone whose boundaries were crossed in, the worst ways. And so she needs to be able to set her boundaries as far or as close as it feels safe for her. And I don't think she's ever going to be, Sugar Faye, but she'll find her happiness. I think it'll look, quiet. It'll look like stability. It'll look like, stopping by church once or twice a year, just to see what's up. But yeah, I do. I have, of course, I have hope for her.
Caroline, you had mentioned, and I wanted to ask about this, that the story started as a screenplay, and I am curious about the writing process, how you decided to switch from screenplay to novel, and whether or not that made the process of making it into a novel easier or more complicated. What was that process like?
Well, I wrote it as a screenplay, but strangely enough, I had no ambitions of selling it or doing anything with it. It was more a story that I just wanted to get down in the most expeditious way, and the screenplay was perfect for that. What happened once I decided to write it as a novel, which by the way came out of me just loving these characters and loving the setting, and it felt like there was something important to explore, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I just knew I wanted more time with it and more words to attach to it. So once I made that decision, the screenplay was actually really helpful in creating a structure which I would later, slash up and change around. And, it's the bones of the original screenplay have been rearranged a lot. But as far as demystifying the act of writing a novel, the screenplay was super, super helpful. It made it feel manageable. It wasn't like I was trying to write 400 pages from the first word. It was, oh, this story has a shape and these characters are alive, and now I'm going to write scene upon scene upon scene that I've already sort of roughed out and connect those things together using just far more words to do it than I did in the screenplay.
Another thing I want to ask, and I'll direct this question to both of you because you have a connection to Texas where the book is set. I think sometimes the idea of Texas can have this monolithic symbol for Southern culture. And I'm curious if you feel like there are certain things about Texas that are singular in how you write about them.
Well, yes. First of all, I love my home state. Much like a family member, I can call it to task on all sorts of issues and legislation. But I love my home state, and it is in no way a monolith. There are so many discrete subcultures. I mean, even within the 60 square miles that I kind of frequented between my mom's house and my dad's house, which was out in the country, you'd get different accents. You'd get, different ways of making your King Ranch casserole or what. So specificity is really important to me. Cultural specificity, geographic specificity. It was so exciting to bring to life this rural area where my dad's ranch is and where I spent a lot of my time growing up. And it's, I think a lot of people who don't live in the state think of Texas as either dry and dusty, or I don't know. There are a couple of caricatured landscapes, I think. And a lot of people don't know that Houston is a subtropical region. It's incredibly lush. It's right at sea level. We've got bayous. We've got, everyone knows about the floods, but I just wanted to down to the blade of grass really describe this setting I grew up in, and that was easy to do. I had all sorts of sense memories attached to the place. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes,
there's some really, really lovely descriptions of the landscape that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, Caroline is a great observer, and she's great at throwing images on the reader's mind's eye. Like Ezra Pound, he talked about phanopia, throwing an image on the reader's eye. And that happens over and over again in this book. And there were just almost toss-off moments that are so beautifully done. Like one chapter begins, "It was the mosquito hour." And if you live in Texas, mosquitoes, if there are mosquitoes where you live, they are vicious. They will drive you inside. Off, I think off is like speed or crack. So it was the mosquito hour really rang true as that's just one small example of how acutely the physical world is observed in this book.
I think with the way the narrative shifts back and forth in time from Kit's present day in 1990 and then back into the 1970s and then back again to her current situation is a really effective parallel with the way it also looks at her physical setting, where she starts in Pecan Hollow, and then in her childhood she's basically on this extended road trip with Manny, and then back to a more narrow focus of Pecan Hollow. And it really highlighted to me the way that even in the moments where she's settled, she still seems to have this sense of restlessness. And yeah, I thought that was a really effective way to explore that part of her story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm always happy to hear when people like the way that the structure turned out, that it was effective for them, because the structure used to be linear. The very first scene was Kit kind of kicking her way down the side of the highway. It was the first scene with Manny. That's how I started the novel. And I had I'll name drop my good friend Julia Langbine, who's publishing a novel coming out this year called American Mermaid. It's wonderful. Anyway, she was one of my early readers, and she was like, I feel like it's too linear. Why don't you just have her have a flashback or something, or like cut the beginning out and plop it in the middle, like at this point. And I thought about it, and I looked around, I tried to find the best like cleavage point, and I literally cut and pasted about 100 pages. And it's why this is the playing God part of being a writer, is like doing something so simple that has such an impact. Was pretty cool. And she was right. It really, I think it transformed the narrative to start, with how things are going great before anything has happened. We get to see in her natural habitat, and then Manny comes and her whole world sort of cracks open.
Yeah, we see what she has to lose, how far she's come, and what she has to lose. I mean, there's chronological order, chronological logic, and then there's emotional order, emotional logic. And it seems to me, in the cutting and pasting you were doing, like, you tell me, but there's a certain kind of emotional compression or impact you're going for in the order you're setting things up.
Yes, I mean, I can't claim too much wizardry. It really was kind of a blunt writerly action. But as I went over it, of course, in subsequent drafts, I then tweaked everything that I had laid out to support that choice and to make it make sense and to make it emotionally resonant. So thank you. It's always
you did it. You did it beautifully.
Thank you.
It all snaps into place in this really nice way.
Ooh, I love to hear that. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the choice to set it when it's set in the 1970s and then the 1990s?
It began as an aesthetic choice. I didn't want to use cell phones. I loved I love the 70s. It's slightly before my time. I was a 1980 baby. But, all of those styles and trends were alive still, kind of bleeding their way into the 80s. And gadgets and, old bedspreads and all that stuff. The aesthetic is just very familiar to me, and it was fun for me to write. And when this was a film, that was what I wanted to see on screen. I wanted to see those kind of gritty, low-tech, phone booths and the old 1960s cars, and just simple, technologically simple, visually more simple, and a little crunchy and dusty. Not too overdeveloped.
Before I move on, I do want to make sure anyone who's tuned in virtually knows that they can put any questions in. We'll continue the discussion, but I'm happy to take a couple minutes to read off some questions from the audience if anyone has anything they want to ask. And then while we wait for folks to send in questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can click on the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen, and I'll just keep an eye on those if they come through. But in the meantime, one thing that I was thinking about as I was reading your book and I was researching this award is sometimes I think when people envision what Southern literature is, this idea of like Southern Gothic and Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner, that kind of writing comes up. But this prize to me really recognizes an enormous breadth of what can be encompassed in Southern literature. So books like last year's prize winner, Things We Lost to the Water, was an Asian American perspective on living in the South. And then this book, Shadows of Pecan Hollow, while it certainly has some darker, possibly Gothic elements, it also, to me, crosses over into like thriller genre. And then it also ultimately has a hopeful, redemptive ending. So I'm wondering what you hope awards like this can do for broadening people's perception of what Southern literature is.
Oh, I love that you said that, and feel so happy and flattered to be included in that description. And when I was nominated for the award, I was like, oh, is it Southern? Like, sometimes I don't even think about Texas as part of the American South. It's just Texas, it's just, I don't know, it's where I'm from, and it wants to be its own thing anyway. Although it's absolutely was part of the South, is part of the South. But as I said before, specificity is so important to me. And I don't think that a handful of, admittedly great authors, but these authors their time and their place is fixed in amber. And the South is changing, it's growing, it's 100,000 different things that have not been preserved in literature or highlighted in literature. And so the more voices, the more specific experiences we get to read about, the deeper our knowledge of the South. I don't want to get too political, but I think the more that we can understand each other, our next door neighbor, and the less fraught all of this will seem. So that's lovely to hear, and I support that mission wholeheartedly.
I want to talk more, I guess, just because Kit is such a fascinating and well-developed character. I want to talk about her relationship with her daughter, because I think that is really interesting, especially in the moments where we get to see that Charlie, her daughter, is so curious about her mom and her past, but her mom is just holding on to all of this shame that makes her avoid telling Kit anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and she didn't always have a child. That was a choice that I made, I think, when I was pregnant with my first child. It's kind of hard to trace all of the choices that I made over the life of the book. But I thought that so much had happened to Kit as a child, and she was carrying so much that when I imagined her emotional arc, I just thought, it's going to be so hard to pull her, to get her to a place of self-compassion and self-understanding on her own, because she's so isolated, and she's not deeply reflective. I mean, she's physical, she's in her body, she's reactive, and she hasn't had enough healing to do the deep kind of work that I think was necessary to give her the emotional arc that I wanted. And so giving her a daughter, I thought, was the perfect way. A daughter that kind of looks like her and kind of looks like someone else. And so if we have this daughter, then she can start to see and connect with the things that happened to her, but it needs to be externalized for her to see that. It's too painful, or she's just not open enough to reflect on her own experience without that external prompt.
Well, I was wondering in the lead up, we know pretty early on that at some point Kit's going to break away from Manny. And, but her need for him is so powerful. It's like a drug. She's addicted to it. He is her life. And so I was wondering, okay, how is this author going to sell me the psychological rupture? What is going to split her off from him? And it worked perfectly. The most powerful thing, certainly one of the most powerful things that can happen to a woman. She becomes pregnant. Here's another beautiful moment. Oh hell, where is it? Where she's newly pregnant. Kit is, and she hasn't told Manny, but she's just starting to realize it, and she feels herself moving with a new contentment, a new settledness. And she said, and there's a line that says, she felt like she was in the presence of a calm and steady friend. And that just really rang true to me. You could mark the start of the transformation from there. The rupture itself is really violent. It takes place in the context of violence. I can absolutely see Kit sticking with Manny as he goes down. When he robs the barbecue joint and finally gets caught. I think if she wasn't pregnant, she would have just gone down with it.
Yeah.
And said, no, I'm staying. I'm going to jail with you. We're in it. But it was this. It had to be something incredibly powerful to pull her away from him. And then, of course, it adds so much complexity and raises the stakes. Once we get to the 1990s, she's got a kid now. And so everything, there's just so much more on the table.
Well, I think we want to take care of others. I think we have a really powerful drive, as I think it's right up there with eating and procreating, is the drive to care for someone else. And whether it's a child, an elderly parent, a pet, a friend in need, the gift of caring for someone else gets us outside of ourselves and elevates us, helps us to emerge out of the kind of micro problems or even macro problems that we're dealing with, and connect with someone else. And I think that is incredibly healing and centering, and was necessary for her, as you said, to extract herself from this relationship. Even if the scars of the relationship followed her, it was what she needed in that moment to physically distance herself.
And parenthood is no bed of roses either. And Kit definitely has a tiger by the tail with Charlie. And that is a realistic depiction of, mother-daughter, very devoted to one another and just not quite at each other's throat all the time. It is a rocky relationship. For, and we can see where that comes from. But that brings with it, its own challenges, which are portrayed in a very authentic way in this book.
Thank you. I wrote all of that, most of that stuff before I had kids, and then some of it after, but they were still very little. So I wasn't sure if it was going to land for people who actually had, I don't know, do you have kids?
My kids are in their 30s now.
Okay, so you've been through the phases.
Yeah.
And I was not very rebellious, as I was kind of a, I walked the line, but I was a pretty good kid. So I didn't see a lot of these struggles up close, and I didn't really have the mindset. But I do have a very precocious, very strong-willed 7-year-old who was like 2 and 3 when I was finishing this up, and that actually gave me just about enough to work with from like a personal place.
I love your point, Caroline, about how the drive to care is so intrinsic to being human. And I think it's really sweet the way some of that gets introduced in Kit early on, when you see her as an animal lover, with the way she encounters the coyote pups, and then in her work with Doc. I think that's a great way to introduce that in someone who is still hard around the edges.
Mm-hmm. I mean, haven't you known people like that who can't quite connect with other human beings, but who have this soft spot for animals? I think animals are like a great gateway to caring and to compassion for people who have been mistreated by other, humans. The old title of this book was Possum Run, which was the name of the town. And my publishers did the same thing. They're like, people don't like possums. We can't put a possum on the cover. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But that's the point. Kit is a possum. She's she's unattractive and like scary, and she's got her teeth out, and she's just nothing that you would want to bring home and love and cuddle. But she takes care of her young, and she's useful, and she's actually harmed to no one. She's just scared and plays dead sometimes. And so I very reluctantly let go of that controlling metaphor, but feel the need to bring it up from time to time, just to slide it in there.
All right, we have about maybe 3 more minutes if anyone watching has any questions. And in the meantime, we can talk a little bit more. I really enjoyed the way, I think I mentioned this before, the way that she has this outsider relationship to her community that makes it hard for her to ask for help. And then when she finally does, when they finally see what she's going through, they can come and show her that she's not the outcast that she's made herself out to be. And I think sometimes in fiction, small town life paints this picture of being full of gossip, being insular. And while there is some of that in Pecan Hollow, all of the characters, even in their worst moments, are so endearing that it makes me so happy when they finally all come together to support her in the end.
Thank you. I'm glad that you felt that way. So I've gotten different reactions about the town. Some people thought it was a little too, I don't know, caricatured or too small towny. But I modeled it on like kind of a mixture of my small town experiences. And the thing that I observed that is, it's true for a lot of rural areas or smaller communities, is that, you know, they might gossip about you and whose husband you're sleeping with, and they
closing in 9 minutes at 8 o'clock.
Sorry, we're closing in about 10
the library.
minutes. So that's our
I love
little
it. You know, they might gossip about you, or they might, you know, give you the stink eye. But if you break your leg, like they're gonna make sure your kids get to school on time. They're gonna drag your tractor out of the mud. They're gonna be there for you when push comes to shove, and that's so true about. I think it's true about a lot of communities. I always see it in Houston. It's just so heartwarming after a big flood to see, you know, even these like wild guys with probably Confederate flags on the back of their trucks helping, you know, little black ladies out of their cars and bringing them to safety. I mean, when we strip away the politics and the ideologies, and when people show up in a place of need, you know, I think people's true colors show. And I think we want to be in that place, but it's, you know, we get in the habit of being insular or backbiting or, you know, fearful and critical. Yeah.
What were the hardest parts to write?
Manny, making Manny believable, you know, pulling him out of sort of movie villain status. The ending changed a lot, and I really wanted to get that right. I don't want to talk about it too much for people who haven't read the book, but the first version of the ending was a little bit too like everything's tied up in a bow. And my editor flagged it, and I worked on it really hard to make it feel both satisfying and not cookie cutter.
It's too complex a story to tie up in a neat bow.
Yeah.
No, you did that correctly.
Thank you.
That's a good editor. Yeah.
Thank you. And she is, and Liz Stein at Morrow. And then the other thing that was hard, and I'm in it right now with my second book, is, man, first 75% of the book is a breeze because you're just setting everything up, and then you have to make it all fit and make everything pay off, and that is hard. That is just really hard. I'm not gifted in plotting and weaving things together. I have to work really, really hard at it, and it takes a long time for me. So I would say that, you know, as a I guess structure thing, that was the hardest for me. It was just making everything fit and make sense. Once you pull, I mean, you know this, once you pull on a thread, it can unravel it can have really big consequences. So
yeah. I'll say this. I mean, a couple of your strengths in this book, you're really good at action writing. And there's a lot of action in here. Mm-hmm. I mean, stick-ups and funds being run. And I mean, and I say this very seriously, like sex is a very complex, mysterious transaction. Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, transaction is, it's just, as human experiences go, it is so complex, it's so deep and so layered. And it's hard to write those experiences. It's so hard to write them and to do justice to that mystery and ambiguity, and also not be cheesy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You nailed it. And the first time Manny and Kit, when they consummate, that's like two Tasmanian devils, you know. It is just quite a scene, and I mean it's like the scariest roller coaster ride you've ever been on. And it is just a big time piece of writing. Just it's one of the best I've ever read.
Oh my gosh, thank you. No one has dared to compliment my sex scenes before, so thank you very much.
Leave it to me. I mean,
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that one was a breeze to write. It went really fast. Anything that was fast paced, to read was fast paced to write. Like my own heart was beating. I was sort of immersed in the moment. And I knew that between those two, I knew Kit wasn't going to let herself be vulnerable with him, that it was going to be a power struggle. And, that it wasn't lovemaking. It was.
Well, you know what David Mamet said? He said, everything is about sex except sex, which is about power.
Yes. I love that.
All right, I'm just going to jump in. We have maybe 3 more minutes, and we have some questions about just one question, really, what the two of you are working on that we can look forward to.
Well, I want to hear from Ben first.
I've got a novel coming out in September. It's called Devil Makes 3. Yeah, so it's pretty much done, and I'm peaceful about that. I do see a question here for Caroline. Will we see Kit and Charlie again?
I've been asked that so many times. I should probably start to do something about it. I do not have an intention to do a sequel, but I'm also not, closed off to that possibility. If they come back to me and, come knocking and wanna come out again, I would love to write about them again. I really love Larry McMurtry as a writer, and I think it's kind of sweet when authors can't quit their characters and, bring them back. And I know there's a lot of unresolved stuff at the end. So I can see that happening, but I certainly don't have a plan. I don't have a vision for it yet.
So what have you got going now? If you feel like talking about it.
Oh yeah, I love talking about it. I have a couple things going. One is my second novel, which I sold about a year ago, and just shocked the pants off of myself by writing in a year. Is called Murder Ballad, and it's about a young songwriter. Also takes place in the 70s. Kind of kicks off on the day that Elvis Presley dies. And it's a young singer-songwriter who goes to Nashville and writes this really wild song, a murder ballad, and sings it once, never sings it again. And then she finds out a couple of weeks later, she hears it on the radio. Someone has stolen her song. And so the song describes a gruesome crime, and she risks implicating herself in this crime if she comes to claim the song. So it's really dark and really juicy, and I love the world. I had so much fun researching it. I got to go to Nashville in February last year, and I love country music, kind of older country music. So I got to spend a lot of time listening to Guy Clark and Waylon and all my favorites from the 70s. And it's a lot of fun. Murder Ballad. So that's that one. That's actually going to come out. And then I wrote this short story that's going to get published. Library's closing. That I think I want to write my third novel on this short story. It's a old New Mexican ghost story, or not ghost story. It's like a campfire story. So it's a little bit more into the horror genre, but like all my books, is not going to be strict genre. It'll be sort of crossover literary fiction. So I'm having a grand time. I'm having so much fun.
Can I do a commercial for this book?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. buy the book, please. I mean, and buy it from Flyleaf, which is a wonderful bookstore. And
Yes.
I mean, really one of the great bookstores in the country. And yeah, every time I go in there, I'm so grateful for. I live in Texas now, not North Carolina, but I'm from Chapel Hill. And anyway, this is a beautifully produced book. I mean, just gorgeous production values, in addition to being an extremely fun book. So buy the book and buy it from Flyleaf.
Yes, please
Yeah.
do.
And on that note, thank you so much to Flyleaf for helping to set up this crowdcast. And thank you to Ben and to Caroline. And Caroline, congratulations. Thank you both. This was a delightful discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed yourselves. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
All
Oh
right,
my goodness, I'm so grateful. Thank you all.
Congratulations, Caroline. You deserve it.
Thank you, Ben. This was so much fun.
Yeah, same here. All right, bye. Till next time.